So as Robert has introduced OpenCLIM, I will go into a bit more detail about OpenCLIM implemented on the DAFNI platform. So to give a bit more background, OpenCLIM project was originally proposed with the plan of using DAFNI from the start, so DAFNI were involved in from the outset. So that we've had that sort of relationship with the DAFNI team from the very beginning. So that's enabled us to do a lot of this work and have a good understanding of the platform and be there as it's evolved over the last 2 or 3 years. So as a bit of a quick recap, we've already seen this, but just to highlight some of the challenges that Robert has mentioned and Brian's mentioned as sort of challenges that DAFNI can help solve. As Robert said, we've got 11, 12 models that are doing a lot of modelling that we need to couple together. These are written in different languages, developed by different people at different universities. So we need to understand how to couple them together, understand the data inputs and outputs and what we can do with them. Some of these are physically based models, such as like the CityCat models, which are doing hydrodynamic modelling at 2-meter resolution. These take a lot of computation requirements. Runs can take over 100 gig of RAM, for example, to get that high resolution outputs that we're sort of interested in understanding climate risk. So we need that computation power that DAFNI can offer as well. Coupled that with the workflow orchestration tools available in DAFNI, it makes it a good sort of solution and platform with development framework. And then finally, just to touch upon having an open, sustainable platform, that's sort of been the name of OpenCLIM. So DAFNI allows us to make this an open platform in the future, be that models, workflows, and data outputs as well. So how does OpenCLIM actually use DAFNI? So this is a quick diagram I threw together. So when Brian was talking about the Credo project and having complex workflows, mentioned having data preparation workflows and then sort of the actual analysis as well. So in OpenCLIM, we have a similar sort of setup. We have separate data preparation workflows that will sort of pre-process national scale data sets into data sets that are more suitable for as inputs to models. These are sort of one-time processes. And then within the actual impact and analysis workflows that we run in DAFNI, some of these will include further data preparation for specifics, be that extracting a subset of an area in a country or subsetting database and attribute values, for example. So this is how we tend to tackle the challenges we've got in OpenCLIM. And obviously from the output of those workflows, we can get the data, and as Robert mentioned, that can lead on to developing visualization tools, which aren't explicit output from OpenCLIM, but the capacity is there through developing these data cubes that Robert's mentioned. On the side there, I've said how we actually interact with the DAFNI platform. So you've seen a few screenshots of the user interface and the web interfaces that DAFNI has. We use them, but we also use the API, so we can script things together, so we can couple workflows in the background and run them, so we can enable us to run more large-scale analysis rather than having to do everything manually through the user interface. And then briefly just mentioned, we also use the data sharing platform for the project. So we can upload data sets and share them with other colleagues within the group rather than having to send things by email and version mismanagement and all that sort of problems that can cause through that. So Robert introduced some of the hazard and sort of workflows areas. Just to recap, that these workflows are, although we've got 6, as Robert mentioned and shown on the slide there, these are also coupled and sort of interact with each other. So we can't understand heat stress or urban flooding in cities in 2080, let's say, unless we know what the urban form is going to look like in 2080. So workflows such as urban development workflow feeds into other workflows, and that happens across a number of these workflows. And DAFNI gives us the power to couple these different workflows together to do that sort of analysis. So this is an example workflow. You probably can't read that, but this is a workflow for flooding. This is the initial diagram we drew up at the beginning of the project for what the flooding workflow might look like. So in there we've got a number of models. Blue on the screen, blue models, they're the processing, they're the flood models, they're urban development model, they're the models that are doing analysis and understanding and generating risks and outputs. We've got what's shown in green, which is labeled processing. These are pre-processing steps that process the data from input form or process the outputs of models ready for the input into the next model, and so on. So these are the key linkages that we've had to develop during the OpenCLIM project. As Robert said, the models that actually do the analysis already existed at the beginning of the project. This project's about developing a framework which couples those together to generate the new understandings. This is quite a complex workflow. This is just one of them. And obviously, yeah, we've got another 6 or 7 of these that are part of OpenCLIM and are now being implemented on the platform. So as a quick example, so just to demonstrate in this model, this is quite a complex workflow. So I'm not going to go into details of this. I'm going to switch to a small component of this workflow, which is the urban development workflow. So this is a model which produces outputs such as on the screen there, which gives us potential urban form in plausible areas, building patterns, and given the population expansion, given a few considerations listed by bullet points there. So that sort of workflow looks something like this, and that's sort of another screenshot of the DAFNI platform, the current UI for developing, where you can drag and drop these models in, and we can switch the parameters around and things like that. If we simplify that again, we can see that a lot of the workflows are all about doing the pre-processing steps, not necessarily around actually doing the modeling and generating the outputs. The focus of the project is about developing these pre-processing tools to allow us to do the modeling, get the interesting results, and be able to trust the results we get. So this is just a highlight of some of those tools that we've developed. Now, these are generic tools that we've developed in OpenCLIM, but hopefully anyone else on the platform can use. This comes back to the idea of model sharing on DAFNI and why it's a sort of good sort of platform to do that. So these tools allow us to do some generic operations, be that sort of moving files around using archive data. And then at the bottom there, we've got some of those spatial focus tools. So being able to extract subsets, convert data formats, convert projections, as an idea of being able to handle these issues that we get when we couple models together. So if we know inputs and outputs are different, we can drag and drop one of these tools in, and they're generic enough to be able to parameterize to do what we need to convert the data. And this tool set gives us the flexibility and the flexibility for us to use any model they like. As long as they understand what the outputs look like and the inputs to the next model, they can drag and drop these tools and parameterize them as required. Just an example here. So in OpenCLIM, it's a national analysis. So we're doing a lot of national data processing. So we have data such as shown on the your left of the screen, which is sort of national data set. And obviously, if we run some of these models, although we can run them nationally, quite often you don't want to. You want to run them for focused area of interest. So we can use tools like the clip or extract tool to extract for a defined area, such as Glasgow in this case. So there's been a bit of mention about data and the National Infrastructure Database that sits on DAFNI. OpenCLIM's using a lot of national data sets I've already mentioned. So for example, on the right-hand side, we've got OS Mass Map from Oldham Survey, which obviously, for those who don't know, it's polygon-based with every feature in the UK, or Great Britain rather. And that's obviously, it's 400 gigabyte data set. We need to handle that, and sharing that's obviously quite difficult, but DAFNI allows us to do that a lot more easily than otherwise might be possible. This also enables sharing of this data more easily, makes licensing a lot easier for us as academics, and DAFNI can worry about that licensing side of things. We also have UK CPE 18 data. We've put up there all the SSPs, which we've mentioned previously, the socioeconomic pathways, which gives us 1 kilometre scale population projections to 2100, for example. All these data sets are now housed on DAFNI for people to use, and we use them a lot, and we sort of pull in the national data sets and clip them down and format them, whatever, for the OpenCLIM modelling framework. So I said at the beginning we use the API rather than necessarily always the interface. So I couldn't give a talk without putting a little bit of code in, but for those that aren't coders, they'll be happy to see I've put some comments in there, which you can see. So we can use the API to allow scripting to run workflows. So back in the start of the project, some of the functionality that we needed in DAFNI wasn't available, such as being able to run lots and lots of workflows, doing like parameter sweep sort of analysis. So we developed these scripts that use the API, so we can do that. We can do that parameter sweep analysis ourselves. We're calling the DAFNI API to run the workflows, and then getting the results off there as well. So this is really powerful for those that are more interested in this and want to do large-scale analysis. So we can script up processes to run hundreds or even thousands of workflows if we want, rather than having to do it all through the user interface. So if you run hundreds rather than having to sit there and run every one, we could just set the script away and let it run over the space of a few days until all the workflows have run. And obviously by doing that, we can also do lots of other things. So we can couple workflows together. We can set in our own decision-making processes. So when one workflow completes, we can see what the result is and then decide from there what the next workflow should look like or how we should parameterize that next workflow. So that gives us that extra power that wasn't necessarily always possible in DAFNI. It is becoming more possible now with the introduction of looping functionality in the workflows, which some of the other projects are using. We're slowly starting to use that interface, but we originally set out to do that via scripting methods. And also, so one of the other use cases we have is we record metadata for our runs locally, so we can store, so we know what runs we've done locally. So obviously all the results go to the National Infrastructure Database, and accessing all the parameter sets that we use can be difficult on DAFNI. So as part of our scripting, we write metadata locally, so we've got a record locally of all the parameters that are being used into the different models and workflows. And then just as a final side note, the API does allow us to also potentially develop user interfaces, so we can use user interfaces to set up models and workflows. This isn't part of OpenCLIM, this is another side project we've got going on at Newcastle, involving some of the research software engineering team at Newcastle. So we can use the API and user interfaces to actually set up workflows that we want to run and view results as well. So this doesn't necessarily have to be hosted on DAFNI, it can be hosted more locally, and you can use the API to do that. Being mentioned about provenance and being able to check versioning, obviously that's quite a big issue with the OpenCLIM project. We've got lots of models, lots of developers doing their own changes to models, and they've been evolving throughout the project. So being able to track what version of which model is being used to generate what result set is quite important and quite critical. So we've got that traceability of how results are being generated. Because as Robert said, this work's hopefully going to feed into the next CCRA, so we need to have that trustworthiness in the results. So there's a couple of screenshots here that show that when we release a new version of a model or a workflow, we can include comments in that to allow people to understand what's changed. We use GitHub to allow us to update models. So a user can update their own model, and that creates a new version on DAFNI that's uploaded through the API. So it automatically uploads it to DAFNI, and that creates a new version ID, and that doesn't automatically populate existing workflows. Existing workflows remain locked as they are. New workflows that are created would have the updated model. So we know that the results aren't being affected, and if you have a result set, go to explore that, you know that the model, you can see the model versions being used, and we can understand any results that are generated. That was all I was going to say. I have no idea how long I've spoke for there. But so OpenCLIM allows us to do a lot of the challenges that we faced in DAFNI, DAFNI allows us to solve a lot of the challenges that we have in OpenCLIM from the outset. And it has evolved as the project's moved on as well. So it allows us to develop these workflows, and DAFNI team themselves have sort of been working with us throughout, so they've updated various aspects of the platform to be us, and as I'm sure you acknowledge, it's still moving forward and providing those updates that we need as a project. And yeah, it gives us that legacy that at the end of the project, which allows us the platform to exist beyond the life of OpenCLIM, so others can interact with it, others can use those models, others can use the data outputs and the workflows as well. So yeah, I'll leave that there.
Very good. Craig, thank you very much for your talk.